we go back a little bit to the Big Bang Theory, which of course is that somewhere back in countless ages, the energy of the universe kind of scrunched up and went and created matter, and it sparked an explosion, which then threw out all of the things that became the galaxies and the planets and all like that. And of course, we've all been taught about the Big Bang Theory, right? Well, even the Big Bang Theory is now being called into question. So what we think we know, we don't really know. We also know that going back into the 80s, I have mainstream newspaper clips, and here's one from just 2013 where they are discovering new worlds out there. It's really wild because all of my life, and a lot of you guys are about my age or so, and you may remember all the science fiction movies of the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, and they're talking about rocket ships and blah, blah, and going to other worlds and aliens. And do you realize it was not until the late 1990s, I think about 1999, that they finally, science confirmed that there might have been another planet out there somewhere, okay? And but now, of course, we know that there's, in the words of the late Carl Sagan, there's billions and billions of them out there, right? So, how do we know about all this stuff, and how do we know about our own solar system and how it was formed? And I would direct you to the Sumerian tablets that predate the Bible by thousands of years. And probably we can know more about the ancient Sumerians than we'll ever know about the ancient Egyptians or Greeks, because the Egyptians, the Greeks, they wrote things down on papyrus and scrolls that were destroyed in wars, burned up, degenerated, fell apart. The Sumerians would etch their writings in cuneiform onto clay tablets and then bake them. There's about 500,000 of them still in existence. So where are they? They're scattered in museums around the world, probably buried in the basement or up in the attic somewhere. And only about half of these have been translated. And then I don't have to tell you about the squabbles and the controversies that goes on over the translations. Just to make a quick point, I was reading all of Zecharia Sitchin's material for years, and I agree with those who say I'm not supporting 100% everything he says and all of his translations or all of his interpretations, but I think in general he's onto it. There's a fellow named Michael Heisman who has tried to say that no, he doesn't know what he's talking about because he never, in the Sumerian tablets, they never even mentioned the word Anunnaki. Well, I went back to the material in Oxford in England of the original translations of the Sumerian, and I found out all the way through there they're talking about the Ananu gods, Enki, Enlil, and apparently Sitchin and others have simply pluralized it and said we'll call them the Anunnaki. So to say that the guy's full of hogwash just because he used the word Anunnaki instead of the Ananu gods, I think is kind of a stretch. And I think it seems to be there's an agenda there. And you're going to see this agenda all through this presentation, hidden history, things they don't want us to know about. So the ancient Sumerian tablets, what did they tell us? Well, they tell us that, by the way, as you can see here on one of their ancient steels, they had already a pretty good conception of our solar system and of the proper proportions of the planets. How in the world they knew that? Because Neptune was only discovered in 1846, and they didn't know about Pluto until 1930. And yet they've got it all down these thousands of years ago. To me, this is really strong evidence that they were doing more than stargazing. Okay, according to the Sumerian tablets, the original solar system, there was Mercury, and then there was Venus, and then there was this planet called Tiamat. I take it back. There was Mercury, Venus, Mars, and then this big watery planet called Tiamat. And according to the Sumerian scribes, this is the way the solar system then looked at that time. But they talk about the war in the heavens and the fact that there was another planet up there, Nibiru, the planet of the crossing, as it's called. And this is because Nibiru is on an elliptical orbit that takes it far outside of our solar system. And it comes around, several of the scholars believe that they were counting up to be about 3,600 years. Every 3,600 years, it comes back through our solar system and dragging along a few moons and no telling what kind of space trash. And every time that happens, then it impacts the Earth one way or another. Again, we're back to these newspaper clippings where they feel like that there is another planet out there. We can't see it because it's way out in the dark and it's on out past Pluto. But just more and more, they say, yeah, there's something out there. And one of the ways they know this is because of the perturbations in the orbits of the outer planets. So Nibiru comes swinging through, and one of the moons smacks Tiamat. It destroys half the planet, just turns it into rubble. And this rubble, though, continues in the orbit of Tiamat. And this is what we now know as the asteroid belt. Well, what happened to the other half of Tiamat, this giant watery planet? Well, according to the tablets, it was bounced over past the orbit of Mars and went into orbit there, and then over millions of years coalesced into the Earth. And this is why, I don't know if I have a slide here, but so now we get the solar system as we know it now. I didn't have the slide, but some of you who keep up with scientific information probably are well aware that they found all kinds of traces of Martian life in meteorites and rocks and things here on the Earth. And there's even a theory that life on Earth began because we were seeded here from Mars. But I think the Sumerian explanation of Tiamat, the watery planet, bringing all of this water and one-celled organisms, et cetera, and then coalescing into the Earth also explains the Earth. Also explains why half the Earth is water. You've got, when I was a kid, we were taught the moon pulled away from the Earth. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll talk about that too. Now, we know that we've got some strange moons in our solar system. Early on, Carl Sagan, along with some Russian scientists, were convinced that Phobos, one of the moons of Mars, was an artificial object. And as he said, a natural satellite cannot be a hollow object. So remember that, because we're going to get back to hollow object when we get to our own familiar satellite, the moon. Here is Iapetus, which really just fascinates me. This is a close-up from one of the space probes. And it's got this wall or ridge all around the thing, you know. I don't know about you, but it reminds me of Kong Island. You got King Kong on one side, everybody else on the other, but it's a very odd place. And also you notice the comparison, it looks eerily like the Death Star from Star Wars. And then when the sun's just right, it's also known as the yin-yang planet, because look, it forms the ancient symbol for yin and yang. Isn't that interesting? Now we've got our own moon, which is pretty odd. And we could spend a whole session on this, but I'm going to just try to get through it pretty easy. When one of the lunar modules was cut loose and fell back onto the moon, NASA officials announced that the moon vibrated and rang like a bell for like 8 hours or something like that, which would indicate that it's maybe hollow. And of course, when I was a kid in school, we were taught the moon's just this dead, airless world, maybe some volcanic activity, but no water, no magnetic field, nothing like that. And now we know it's quite the opposite. There is no volcanic activity, and this is really interesting because I don't think I have the slide, but I have some newspaper clippings of Armstrong and the guys that were going to land on the moon, and the day before they reported back that they had seen a bright light emanating from I think it's Aristarchus crater. And this actually made it into the mainstream news media because at that time they were saying, well, there's volcanic activity there. And of course, after we got there, we found out there is no volcanic activity. So what's making the bright light in the crater? And of course, nobody ever answered that because we don't talk about that. Originally, the idea was, and I was taught, that the moon tore away from the Earth. And that's what created the giant hole, which is now the Pacific Ocean. But when we got to the moon, we found out that the mineral composition is nowhere near that of rocks on the Earth. So, in other words, it came from somewhere else. And let me see if we've got so now the latest theory is the big whack, and this is really interesting because now they're saying, well, somebody came through, a body came through and struck the Earth and broke up and created the moon, which sounds very similar to what the Sumerians were trying to tell us, right? And the big whack, of course, explains supposedly the anomalies on the moon. I love that word, anomalies. That's a scientific expression for WTF. We got things like the shard. We don't know what this is, but it juts a mile above the moon's surface and is photographed. And my little clumsy fingers are kind of bad, but, well, I don't know if you can see it. There's the shard. And don't worry about there's some little marks up in here. Don't worry, those are registration marks. The key thing is the shard. We don't know what this is, but it appears to be artificial. Now we've got all these shots coming from NASA photographs that are really fascinating. We've got this cigar-shaped object jutting out over a crater. We've got another cigar-shaped object apparently flying across the surface of the moon. You can actually see the shadow under it. So there's stuff going on the moon, our own nearest world that we're not being told about and we don't really know about. I love this one too. This is another NASA photo. And you can see what appears to be like maybe a big round boulder that rolled off of this crater. Oops, get back. This crater over here. And of course, this is all blown up and it's a slide. But in the original photograph that I've seen, the tracks not only roll down this side of the crater, but they come up the inside of the crater. So now wait a minute, I can understand a natural object maybe coming loose and rolling down the crater, but how do you roll up a crater if you don't have any motive power? And then you look up above, I don't know if this thing's even working, there we go. Right up here, see, and you can see some more tracks. And the bottom ones kind of look like treads. The top one looks like tire tracks or something. And these are not just exceptions. These are the rules. Because there was, when I prepared my book, Alien Agenda, I studied a NASA publication that was put out in the late 60s, but before we went to the moon. And it was all about moon anomalies. And they traced all this back into the times of Kepler and Galileo and the very first telescopes. And since that time, there have been people who have seen structures, have seen lights moving, have seen clouds of something moving across the moon. So we don't even know about our own closest body. And of course, then, as I mentioned about occult and the moon eclipsing the sun, the moon is at just the right distance from the Earth that when it eclipses the sun, it completely covers the corona of the sun. All right, so now keeping that in mind, and then you try to figure out, well, where did the moon come from? One side of the moon is heavier than the other side. It's got a denser layer, okay? And it's got matter and material, rocks on there that predate the moon and the Earth. The Earth is, I forget now, I think it's about 8 billion years old, they say. And some of these rocks they found were like 10 and 12 billion years old, according to their best estimate. So what do we got here? We got a body coming through space, and you got bugs on the windshield. All right? It's picking up stuff as it's going through space, which accounts for the fact that one side of the moon is heavier. So here's the Earth. Here comes the moon. Goes past the Earth. It's caught in the gravitational field. And it comes back. Okay, I can see that. Now, so we should have a moon that's in a elliptical orbit and kind of wobbling around as it's captured and put into orbit around the Earth. But that's not what we have. We have a body that's in almost a near perfect circular orbit right around the equator of the Earth. And it's stationary. One side's always facing the Earth. Whoa. And it's at just the proper distance to cover the corona of the sun when there's an eclipse. How can that be? Isaac Asimov, famous astronomer and science fiction writer, he said the moon shouldn't be where it is. But it is. And this leads to our circular thinking, see, because we all know there's no such thing as aliens. But we know the moon's been around forever, and we know then somebody must have parked it there to be in this kind of position, but we know it wasn't us, and we know there's no such thing as aliens, so we just won't talk about it. On the moon, they claim to have found pyramids. Now I think we're beginning to get to the truth of some of this stuff. Because also on Mars, in the Cydonia region, you have pyramids. Pyramids seems to be a common structure.
Was there a real photo that went prior to this?
The moon?
Yeah.
No, I think that was an illustration. And then of course we get to our own planet, and we got all these anomalies. I won't get into all of them, but up here you've got obviously a manufactured axe that's found in rock sediment that's like 1 million years old. You've got handprints in this rock. You've got these round balls of Guatemala. They're perfectly round. You all know about the crystal skulls and how odd they are. The vitrified fortresses in Scotland. The Baghdad Battery, okay, that shows that they were able to generate a little bit of electricity even back at the time of the Sumerians. But the common theme throughout all of this is flight. If there's pyramids on the moon and Mars, if there's artificial things on the moon and on Iapetus and on Phobos, then somebody's traveling around the universe. Then you go and check out every ancient culture on the world. And the common denominator is they talk about the gods that came from the sky. And they're flying around. Now, I think you can understand today, if somebody with a jetpack comes and lands in your front yard, you're just going to go, hey, who the hell are you? Okay? No big deal, because you know man can fly. But you got to understand, in 1906, when the Wright brothers flew, and here's a little inside story on the news media, the New York Times, who had reporters at Kitty Hawk, refused to run the story because their science editors told them, man can't fly. There's no such thing as heavier than air flight. You just can't do it. And it was more than a year after the flight at Kitty Hawk that the New York Times, our newspaper of record, finally got around to telling people that it worked. And that was only after that the French invited the Wright brothers over to Europe, and they took their flying machine over there and they flew it all around. And it made the European media, and they made a big deal about it. And finally this staid old New York Times says, well, okay. And they finally ran the story. So see, there's so much going on and we don't get told about it. But flight all over the world, from the ancient Vedas, the flying dragons of the Chinese, the flying boats of the Egyptians, the flying shields of the Romans, and they're all talking about this. So, hey, something's going on, all right? This is not something that just started in 1947. You've got other oddities like the Antikythera mechanism, which they found on a sunken Greek galley back in the early 1900s, and they couldn't figure out what it was. It was all kind of crusted over and everything. But since then, they've cleaned it up. They looked in there. There's all these little gears and all kinds of things. It's a computer. It's an astrological computer. And then down in Colombia, you've got these little trinket things that everybody says, oh, they're made out of gold, by the way. And of course, we all know about the importance of gold. And they say, well, these are just bees or some kind of insect, and just a stylized thing, you know. But some Germans got together and built a model, and guess what? It flew just fine. It's a flying airplane, is what it is. So we've got all of this evidence lying all around the world that nobody's paying any attention to except us. And that brings us then to the question of Atlantis. And of course, Atlantis, the idea that there was this great civilization somewhere that got destroyed and predates our own history. The argument now is, where was Atlantis? And you get arguments that say it was a big island in the middle of the Atlantic. You've got ruins found off the coast of Cuba. They say, no, it's down near Bimini. Down at the bottom, you see the star. There's one theory that says Atlantis was actually Antarctica before there was a pole shift, and that the Earth tilted and it froze over, and that's where it was. And of course, you got more conventional people saying, no, it was the island of Santorini before a big volcano exploded, and no, it was the island of Cyprus. There's even one theory that said, oh, no, it was in the South China Sea. All right, and of course, then you get into the competing ancient mythological things of Atlantis and Mu and all of these places. And frankly, folks, I think we're dealing with the blind men and the elephant. If you remember that story, they sent the blind men and the elephant to the zoo because they all wanted to experience the elephant. So they got there, and one of them grabbed him around the leg, and he said, oh, the elephant's like a big post. And the other one had his tail, and he said, no, it's like a rope. And the other one had his nose, and he said, no, it's like a big hose. Another one had his ear, said, no, it's like a big fan. Another one's pressing on his side and said, no, the elephant's like a wall. They were all right, but they were all wrong. It was more than all of that. And for my money, I think we are dealing with that there was a planet-wide civilization, very highly sophisticated, using technologies that we're only just now becoming aware of, much less understanding. And that what happens here is you have these scientists fighting over Atlantis, and they all have a piece of it. And unfortunately, that's all we've been left is pieces. And then it gets worse than that, because as we go on, you're going to find out these pieces are being hidden from you. They're doing everything they can to keep you from knowing about all of this prehistory, because knowledge is indeed power. You've got these giants bones, and I've got a whole bulging file on stories from the 1800s where they were discovering huge giant bones. And when I say giant, some of them are kind of normal giant, and some of them are really giant. And of course, you can find pictures like this on the internet, and of course, the naysayers will tell you, well, they're all phony. They're all just doctored photographs. And I'm sure that some of them probably are, but not all of them. We see. You got David and Goliath, so you got ancient stories of giants. You got this tall cowboy guy, whoever he is, from that probably looks like the 20s or 30s. And then you got these modern people. And so, hey, giants are not that big a deal. They're here. But, of course, we're talking about really immense people. And, again, you've got all these stories dating all the way back about giants that are found. And so what happens to them? Well, it seems like that invariably the Smithsonian Institution shows up and collects it all up, and then it just kind of like disappears into a black hole. It's not there. We don't know what happened to all of that. And we're not only talking about giant bones found in the Middle East, but South America, Central America, the Middle West, the Midwest. There are Indian mounds found, and there were apparently giant people here living in North America. And again, you've got some of these pictures, and some of them are kind of questionable, like the guys with the skull. But then you've got the fella up here showing this bone that he's found, and I think that one's probably legitimate. And again, what you have to understand about the Smithsonian is that you probably know it as the world's foremost archaeological repository, the center of science, which is true, but what you don't know is that it is an arm of the United States government. The government owns the Smithsonian and has since the late 1800s. In the Phoenix Gazette of 1909, it gave a very detailed story of Egyptian artifacts found in the north end of the Grand Canyon. And it even goes into great detail about how the Smithsonian was called in and that they built huge platforms and put cranes on there, and they lifted out of these caves these Egyptian artifacts. And of course, how does that fit in with our known history? And it doesn't. Okay, but then again, now you go to the Smithsonian and say, well, what about all those finds in 1909? And they say, what finds? We don't know anything about that. That never happened. And yet, even today, you go to the north end of the Grand Canyon, you go find out there's pretty good sections up there that are now barred to visitors. You're not supposed to go in there. They say, oh, well, danger of cave-in, or, maybe the river's a little too wild. So you can't go there, and yet they've got names like the Tower of Set, the Tower of Ra, the Horus Temple, the Osiris Temple, and the Isis Temple. Where did these names come from if there was nothing to this story about Egyptian artifacts in the Grand Canyon? I was pretty fascinated to find out about the Osirian. How many of y'all are aware of the Osirian? Not very many? Okay. Well, I wasn't either, so don't feel bad. I don't know if you can see this, but this stupid little thing's not really working. Up here at the top, way up here, that is Seti's temple at Abydos in Egypt. Okay, so I went to Seti's temple. I was real interested in that and seeing what they had going there. And one of the attendants said, well, have you seen the Osirian? I said, whoa, what's that? Well, out behind Seti's temple and buried way down is the Osirian, which is this series of finely cut stone blocks, intricately laid upon each other. It's another one of these cases where they are so finely cut that they just fit right together so closely that you really can't even put a piece of paper in there between them. And as far as I could tell, there was no mortar. Yes, sir.
May I make a comment?
Mm-hmm.
I was there a few years ago. My guide, Bob, took me to the temples above, and I said, I want to see the Osirian. He said, what's that? And this is a guy who's trained in Egypt to be a guide.
Right.
I said, it's just down there. He said, we don't want to go there. Let's go on. I said, no, I want to see this. We walked down there. He was amazed.
He had not even seen it.
He didn't know about it. He was amazed.
His guide in Egypt had not even heard about it. Well, and that's the thing. I was very fortunate because when I was there, it was an exceptionally dry period, and the Osirian actually had, I don't know if you can see it on this one, see where the little door is and it looks real dark down there? That's because there's probably a little bit of water standing there. Usually it's underwater. But the time I was there, there we go, some other pictures of it. And there's a crudely built wooden ladder leading down to it, but they had 2x4s across it to block. You weren't supposed to go down there. But in Egypt, a little bakshish gets you through, And the guy actually pulled the 2x4s off so we could go down there and look around. And while we're down there, another of the guards shouted and came over and said, you can't be here. And we paid him a little bakshish. And we kept going and shooting some photographs. And then finally we hear a big angry shout. And here's probably the head guard. And he's got a machine gun. So I listened to him. He said, you can't be down there. And I think he was just mad because he didn't get the bakshish. So they ran us out of there. But that's the whole deal. And just like the gentleman said, they don't want to even acknowledge it's there. Because it obviously is not built by the Egyptians. And that means there was somebody there with some real sophisticated equipment and knowledge, architectural skills before the Egyptians. And that's the thing you have to realize, why there's such a controversy. You may have heard John Anthony West last night talking about the water erosion on the Great Pyramid and on the Sphinx, and the fact that there's such an argument and disagreement between the geologists who say, yeah, it was here 12,000 years ago, and the Egyptologists that go, oh, no, your dating's all wrong. And I'll tell you what the deal is. Without the ancient culture of Egypt and all that mythology, Egypt is a dirt poor third world nation. So Egyptology, the ancient Egyptians and pharaohs and Queen Cleopatra and the whole schmear, that's their bread and butter. And I understand this, but it's not right. It's not the truth. And of course, I'm sure you've seen the technology that they were using. These tubes connected to the Jed pillar, which was their source of power, with a cord. And you got these little things, and they've got what looks like a snake in there, but I think that's just representing energy. And the one at the top's the photograph. The complete drawing's over here, and it's tough to get a view of these because let me tell you something. This is not at one place. I saw at least 3 or 4 of these same engravings, but they're always in a narrow little hallway, and you can't really get back to get. You have to really going to have a good camera and some good knowledge of photography to be able to get a shot of it. You're going to love this one. We were in Sekhmet's tomb. Those hands are my wife, Carol, and she's shorter than I am. So she's holding her camera up over her head, trying to get a picture of the little statue of Sekhmet. And I want to tell you something. I'm not the most touchy-feely person in the whole world, show me, set it afire, see what it does. I don't know. And yet, I want to tell you something. In this Sekhmet's tomb, I was even impacted by the energy that is in that place. So Carol was trying to take a picture, and she said, hey, it sucked all the energy out of my camera. I said, it won't work. And that camera never worked again the rest of the trip. Okay, and I thought, yeah, Sekhmet sucked your energy. That sounds like a joke, But we get home, and one of the other people that were with us sent me this photograph. They were behind Carol. And they took this photograph at the exact moment that you can see this energy trail trailing away from her camera. Now, those of you who know about photography, you know that if there was a light source on the camera and it was started up way up here and you pull it down, then yeah, you could get a streak on there, But she never got higher than that. That's the energy being sucked out of her camera. It's amazing. Here's an ancient gate outside a Giza wall, and you notice a little figure on top. Kind of looks eerily like a small alien gray, right? By the way, after I came back and started talking about this gate, they took it down, and I hope they didn't destroy it. You got places like Karnak, thousands of these stones over in France. And see, you've probably never heard of this. There's just all these weird places. Baalbek, that's a good one too. And if you study Sitchin's material, he has said that these ancient tablets talk about Baalbek as basically the point where these Anunnaki gods came and went. And so the theory is these huge stones down here were a platform, a landing platform for craft. And the bigger stones on top, and then the wall over here, they built a Roman city on top of this. So for the longest time, everybody thought that the Romans had made all this, but the Romans had no way of dealing with rocks of stones of that size. Here's an obelisk that they had quarried but never got placed in position. You can see the size of it with all these people. And I noticed the other night at the panel, they were talking about the giant rocks and our giant blocks of stone, and do we have the means to lift things like that today? And so when I was writing my book, Our Occulted History, I really dug into that. And here's what I found out. There are perhaps today 2 cranes in the world. I think one of them's in Britain and another one's in Europe, that might be capable of lifting 100 tons rocks or whatever. But here's the clincher. Neither one of them are mobile. They can lift things, but they can't move them anywhere. And these stones at Baalbek, and just like Stonehenge and just like other places, they were quarried miles away. So lifting them's one thing. You can always argue that you roll them up on rollers and, keep running around with logs and get 2,000 people pushing on it and maybe you can move it around somewhere, but can you lift it? And even if you can lift it, can you move it somewhere? So we're right back where we started from, mysteries. Now, some of you know about Ed Leekenschall's the Coral Castle in Florida. Y'all know about that? Okay, well, you ought to look into that. That's a fascinating thing. This he was an old guy, and he, by himself, built this huge exhibit out of these huge stones that he would carve out and then place in these various positions. And nobody ever could tell how he did that. And the closest thing we have is that some kids were playing nearby at one time when a truck came and delivered some of these giant stones. And Ed told the drivers and said, go get some lunch and come back after lunch. And they did, and while they were gone, the kids said they saw him and he had what looked like ice cream cones in his hand, little conical objects, And when the guys came back after lunch, all this stuff was out of the truck and up, And the only clue we have as to what old Ed was up to is that he did say one time that he knew the secrets of the ancient Egyptians. And so then you get things like the Coral Castle. And then I was also flabbergasted to learn about the giant heads on Easter Island. Okay, and we've all know about those, and they also already have caused so much controversy and so much wonderment because, those huge heads. And you have a primitive people there whose, I guess their basic tools were deer antlers or stones or something, a stick. And they've carved these giant heads and placed them in there. But then I found out that there's bodies under there. It's not just the heads. You got a huge body down there that's sometimes 2 and 3 times bigger, longer than the head. Now, how come we don't hear more about that? Well, because on somebody's orders, when they excavated these things, they came back in and filled them back in. They don't want you to know that there's this stuff going on. And when you go home and tell all your friends and or neighbors and or relatives, okay, they're going to go, what? They're not even going to believe you because they never see this stuff. Göbekli Tepe, I won't go into too much of that because I think my friend Linda Howe took care of some of this, but that's, again, a fantastic place, dating back 12,000 years with intricate designs and all kinds of things. They call it the Turkish Stonehenge, and it predates Stonehenge by 7,000 years. Well, hey, that alone leaves out the Egyptians, right? Because the Egyptians only go back 5,000 years. And their intricate carvings, etchings, and keep in mind, Göbekli Tepe is just now being excavated and studied. We know about all the strange skulls found all around the world, particularly in South America. And then that got me to thinking, because I know at one time I was at the Charlottenburg Castle there in Berlin and actually saw the real Nefertiti. And, oh, my God, it is beautiful. It is incredible. And, of course, she's got this high hat on, like so many of them did. And it makes you wonder if perhaps these high conical hats and, the thing like the popes wear now is ceremonial, but they used to wear those all the time. Was this to cover up their tall, non-human skull? And, of course, some of the late Lloyd Pye. Yeah. Thank you, and he definitely deserves your applause because good old Lloyd, boy, he stuck right to it. He fought all the way to the end, trying to show that his skull was non-human. In fact, I don't want to get too conspiratorial, but I couldn't help but wonder that, it seems like he was just about on a breakthrough there to prove that this was a non-human, or at least partially non-human skull, and then he died of cancer. So it definitely raises the issue of, did we come from somewhere else? And again, not only is there evidence all around the world of flying machines and people flying through the air, but you've got all these carvings and drawings and everything else that just, quite frankly, do not appear to be human. And being a kind of a cartoonist artist, I mean, I can understand taking liberties with the human figure and making cartoony type things, but generally you try to stick with what you know, and these things are just pretty unusual. So this shows that there has been visitation. There's been beings here on this planet. And of course, we all remember 2001 Space Odyssey, and how that, so the concept, actually, the idea that mankind has been pulled up by his bootstraps and kicked along is actually not very new. We've kind of figured this out for a long time. We just didn't know the who's, whys, and wherefores, and I think we're getting that with the Sumerian tablets. Even show them in cartoons now, Say, boy, they're going to get a kick out of this. And, I have thought about that. Have you thought about this? 1,000 years from now, you got somebody digging around here, and they find a Coke bottle. What's this? Obviously, some kind of ancient artifact alluding to the feminine goddess. We don't know what we don't know. So the story in the Sumerian tablets seems to be more and more true, and basically, again, we find that they say that 432,000 years ago, and that's being kind of particular. I'm not sure I'd put that fine a date on it. Could be anywhere from 300,000 to 500,000. But something happened, and somebody came here, and things started happening. And they even tell you how that they created this worker race. They took the seed of an Anunnaki male, and they impregnated the egg of an Anunnaki female, and then she carried it to term, and then they, by cesarean section, they delivered what they call the Adama, the Adam, the first human, the earth man. And I think that it's pretty obvious that there's been intervention somehow or another. But the thing I want to stress on you, and I want you to stress on your friends and our relatives, is that nobody's saying that that aliens created us. They didn't create us. Okay, they simply improved the breed, just like we do with horses and sheep, and cows, and dogs, and cats. Okay, except instead of breeding like we do with animals, or have up till recently, they actually went in and manipulated the DNA and created their Adama, their Adam, their worker race. And interestingly enough, according to those tablets, they had the same ethical arguments that we're having. And some of them were saying, well, it's not right for us to, we're not God. We can't play God. We can't create anything. It's not up to us to create life. And their science officer, Enki, he argued, well, we're not creating anything. We're just improving the breed. And we need these workers to do all the drudge work. And we need to cut down on the work shortages and strikes and stuff, because all these Anunnaki, they said, hey, we signed up to be astronauts. We didn't sign up to be gold miners and digging in the dirt. So that argument finally won out, and they said, okay, we're gonna create this race. And so by tweaking the DNA, they came up with modern man. And then you all heard Michael Tellinger talk about these circles in Africa. Here's some of them that I'll show you, so we'll kind of zip on through this. I even believe, I really do, I'm beginning to really agree with Tellinger that they probably have discovered Enki's African laboratory. They're at this place they call Adam's Calendar. because it matches the descriptions that we find in the ancient Sumerian tablets, and it clearly said that his lavatory was in the Abzug, which has been translated to be Africa. This is really fascinating to me. They're in the most of them are in the exact configuration of a magnetron, which is what you use to generate energy. And I was really fascinated that when they went 600 feet down, they found the average temperature outside the circles was 42 degrees Fahrenheit, but inside the circles it went up to 136 degrees. So these circles somehow, just by their geometric configuration, are generating energy and power. And we need to figure this out so we can stop burning fossil fuel and killing ourselves with nuclear energy. The Great Pyramid, this Dr. Michael Barr from Drexel University, he says that that the Great Pyramid is not even made out of limestone. It just appears to be limestone, but it's actually a poured geopolymer concrete. Now, this brings up a whole new theory about creation of these pyramids, because the big argument is, how could these Egyptians drag all these huge stones through the desert, and how could they pile them up and make them into such perfect pyramids? Well, maybe they didn't. Maybe they just built forms and poured it. That could explain this. It also could explain why that some of these, I think last night they were talking about a pyramid that they found buried, and that they didn't know what it was made out of. Maybe it was made out of this polymer. But again, we find that the common denominator are these pyramids all around the world. Mexico, China. This photograph down here was taken about the time of World War II by pilots flying over China. Today, they got trees planted on it, and they're trying to act like, no, that's just a hill. And of course, we know about the crop circles, and some of them get really weird, like this one right here at Showbolten, which seemed to be a response to, on the right, we have a binary code message that was sent from Puerto Rico in 1974, and without trying to get into too much detail, it gave a DNA breakdown. It shows down here, you see a figure of a human that says we kind of look like this. Right below that, you see the little kind of brownish objects. That represents the solar system with the big sun, and then Mercury, Mars, and then you can see the one lifted up above. That represents we're here. We're on the third planet from the sun. We're on from the Earth. So in 2001, we get this, looks like a copy of this Puerto Rico message back, except it's a little bit different. It's got different DNA sequence. I don't know why this thing's not working. And then where you see the human, you see something with a great big head and a little bitty body. It kind of looks like a deal. And then over here you see their solar system, and they're on the 4th, 5th, 6th planet, 7th planet. They really spread out over there. And apparently they are trying to send us a message. And of course, this hit and went away. Unless you know about it, unless you're a pack rat like me and keep files, you just forget about it or don't ever know about it. And then they send us this face that is done in the crop. And it looks fairly human. I don't know. Nobody's certain on whether they're trying to say we look like this or, hey, this is what you look like. You know. But they also like this one. That was this was 2002. Again, you have a very alien-looking face with a binary code message. And the message says, beware the bearers of false gifts and their broken promises, much pain but still time. Believe there's good out there. We oppose deception, conduit closing. Whatever that enigmatic message means. You can make what you want to out of that, but here we are, folks. There's people, they're here, they've been here all along, they're still here, and this is what we're dealing with. So this really, I think, pretty much answers the question, did our ancestors come from space? Yes, because we see evidence that they were not only on the Earth, but in our whole solar system. Well, now the question is, well, did they all leave at some point? or some, at least some of them still here? How do we answer that? Well, you go look at the historical record. If the historical record is, as we were taught, just a slow evolutionary climb from hunter-gatherers to cave people to farmers to city-states to empires, you know, then that ought to be the historical record and that's it. But no, what we find is that throughout history, from the Vedas, from the Sumerian tablets, from the Bible, Ezekiel, the fiery wheel, King Nebuchadnezzar and his fiery furnace, his little gold thing where somebody appeared, okay? We've got evidence of alien manipulation and presence here all throughout our written history. So that means that at least some of them are still here.